Welcome to Twilight Terror Stories. Twilight is not just the end of day, it's the beginning of something else. A time when the shadows stretch and fear takes its first breath. You've stepped into that moment now, and the stories are waiting. Let them find you. On the monitor, the security feed looped, an endless cycle of disbelief etching itself deeper into Arthur Finch's weary face. There he stood, spectral under the fluorescent glare at 11:23 p.m., locking the main doors, briefcase a solid, familiar weight in his hand. Indisputably, the last soul departed. Then, precisely as the clock surrendered to midnight, the lights gave a convulsive shudder. When illumination returned, stable and unwavering, the vast expanse of the open-plan office, mere heartbeats ago a landscape of empty desks and dormant screens, teemed with occupants. Scores of figures hunched in postures of intense concentration, fingers flying across keyboards. Their faces remained frustratingly indistinct, blurred pools of shadow, yet their movements possessed an undeniable, unnerving humanity. Arthur rubbed his eyes, a reflexive attempt to dispel what felt like a waking dream born of exhaustion. The footage, however, remained starkly, stubbornly unchanged. 7 minutes past the witching hour, another flicker, darkness, then light, and the office stood vacant once more, utterly barren, no lingering warmth, no displaced paper, no evidence whatsoever of the spectral congregation. "Mr. Finch?" The sound, hesitant and thin, belonged to Silas, their resident tech savant, materializing beside him like a nervous apparition himself. Is this something we need to escalate?" Arthur shook his head, his gaze still tethered to the screen's impossible narrative. "No, not yet, Silas. Let this remain contained for the moment. Can you isolate this segment? Send me a secure copy?" Silas nodded, relief washing over his features as he retreated, eager to divest himself of the inexplicable. Arthur sank heavily into his chair, the worn leather sign beneath him. His mind churned, a maelstrom of disbelief and nascent dread. What, in God's name, had unfolded within these walls? For 5 years, Arthur had presided over the nocturnal hours at Apex Assurance. 5 years punctuated only by the mundane, retrieving forgotten umbrellas, dealing with malfunctioning climate control. Never anything like this. Rationality scrabbled for purchase, a sophisticated digital ghosting, a glitch of unprecedented complexity, an elaborate, pointless prank. But a colder, deeper intuition whispered of something fundamentally unearthly having transpired. A chilling premonition suggested this was no isolated incident. That ensuing night, the familiar ritual of heading home felt alien. He murmured excuses about pressing deadlines into the phone, trying to ignore the thread of concern in his wife's voice. As the minutes crawled towards midnight's threshold, he stationed himself within the cramped confines of the security room, eyes locked onto the bank of monitors. 11:58, 11:59. The frantic thudding of his own heart reverberated in his ears. Midnight. The anticipated flicker plunged the world into brief, absolute black, and then light. His breath hitched, The office, moments before a study in serene emptiness, was now populated. But these were not his daytime colleagues rendered in ghostly light. These figures were genuinely translucent, their forms shimmering, edges bleeding into the surrounding air like watercolor dropped in water. They moved with an eerie, focused intent, typing on machines he knew were powered down, sifting through spectral documents within locked filing cabinets. Warring against the primal urge to flee, Arthur forced himself out of the relative safety of the security hub. A low, pervasive murmur accompanied the phantom clatter of keys, a sound just below the threshold of discernible language. None of the luminous shapes seemed to register his presence as he navigated the aisles, the air thick with unseen energy. Closer now, he could perceive the desks, the chairs, the very walls through their ephemeral bodies. Ghost workers, the thought ricocheted hysterically through his mind. Actual ghost workers. One turned, a slow, deliberate pivot towards him. Arthur stifled a gasp. Where a face ought to have been, there existed only a swirling vortex of mist, yet he felt, with absolute certainty, its gaze lock onto him. An eternity seemed to pass in that silent appraisal. Then, slowly, deliberately, a translucent hand lifted, beckoning him closer. His feet, seemingly detached from his will, obeyed. The phantasmal figure gestured towards its computer screen. Astonishingly, lines of text scrolled across the incorporeal display. Code, perhaps, or intricate data streams utterly foreign to him. What is this?" he whispered, the sound thin in the charged atmosphere, expecting no reply. Shockingly, a voice bloomed, not in the air, but directly within the confines of his mind. "We work." It resonated, simple and profound. "As we have always worked, as we will always work." "But why?" Arthur managed, his own voice trembling slightly. "Who are you?" The misty head inclined slightly. "We are the resonance left behind, the vestiges of dedication, of lives poured into labor. We continue long after the physical cessation." He scanned the room anew, truly absorbing the spectral tableau. How many individuals had occupied these spaces across the decades? How many existences had been distilled into the tasks performed at these very workstations? The realization was both staggering and deeply sorrowful. "Can I help?" The question felt inadequate, absurd, yet necessary. The presence seemed to ponder this. "You perceive us," the mind voice returned after a pause. "That is novel. Perhaps, yes, an error persists, one we cannot rectify." Its gesture again drew his attention to the screen. This time, the ethereal text resolved into something resembling a client profile. The name at the apex read Clara Hayes. This one, the spectral voice imparted. Her claim was unjustly denied. Night upon night, we strive to amend the record, but the physical realm remains beyond our direct influence. Arthur stared, mind reeling. Clara Hayes. The name sparked recognition. A recent tragic news story. A young mother, succumbing to illness, denied coverage for a crucial experimental treatment. It had been a heartbreaking footnote in the relentless news cycle, outside his direct purview. He hadn't lingered on it. With hands that shook he moved to the nearest tangible workstation, the hum of its power-up a grounding sound in the ethereal quiet. The surrounding ghost workers seemed to pause, their collective, silent attention fixed upon him. He could feel the weight of their spectral expectation, their long-held hope. It took nearly an hour of navigating the labyrinthine corporate system before he located Clara Hayes's file. The ghost had spoken true. An error, small and bureaucratic in origin, had cascaded into catastrophic denial. A few keystrokes could unravel it. He hesitated. This was a flagrant breach of protocol, an unauthorized foray into restricted data. The repercussions could be severe. But then his thoughts turned to Clara, to her bereaved family, to these restless echoes laboring eternally to correct an injustice. He made the change. The instant he saved the corrected file, a collective sigh, almost palpable, seemed to ripple through the office. The luminous figures began to thin, their forms growing increasingly transparent, dissolving like smoke in a gentle breeze. The entity who had communicated with him turned one last time. Gratitude. The mental voice resonated, imbued with profound relief. We may rest. And then they were simply gone. Silence and stillness reclaimed the office. Arthur sat for a long while, the glow of Clara Hayes's amended file painting his face in the dim light. When he finally walked out into the nascent dawn, the world felt subtly altered, sharper, perhaps, yet imbued with a deeper layer of mystery. His job, the very concept of work, could never again be viewed through the same lens. The ripples of their actions, the profound impact on unseen lives, it all resonated with a newfound, solemn significance. He never witnessed the spectral workforce again. The midnight security logs remained stubbornly blank, depicting only an empty, silent office. Yet sometimes, laboring late under the lonely fluorescent glow, he fancies he detects the faintest echo of typing, a low susurration just beyond the range of hearing, and occasionally a file crosses his desk, a claim denied on a thin technicality, a client lost in the bureaucratic shuffle, and he remembers Clara Hayes, remembers the tireless phantoms unable to rest until the scales were balanced, and he does what is necessary. He never spoke of it, of course. Who would lend credence to such a tale? But the encounter irrevocably reshaped him, refining his approach to his duties, his life. He works with a heightened diligence now, acutely aware that the echoes of every decision, every action, may linger long after the actor has departed. Because he knows, with unshakable certainty, that work endures. And sometimes, if one is very fortunate, there comes a chance to make things right, even across the veil. Now, as he secures the building each night, plunging the vast floor into darkness, Arthur pauses. A quiet murmur escapes his lips into the receptive silence. Good night, he offers to the empty chairs, the dormant screens. And thank you. And sometimes, just sometimes, carried on the still air, he imagines a faint, echoing reply. The weekend was conceived in simplicity. These woods, they possessed no profound depths, nor did they sprawl far from the familiar comforts of home. Sometimes, carried on a favorable wind, the distant hum of automobiles threaded through the trees, a reminder of the suburban sprawl clinging tightly to the forest's edge, a constricting belt. Yet, this proximity was precisely its allure, near enough for reassurance, distant enough to court the illusion of wilderness. That first day unfolded without incident. My tent rose near a clearing, a small aperture granting passage to the starlight. Quietude settled, thick and comforting. Over embers, I charred sausages, letting the evening breathe around me. The chirping pulse of crickets, the potential hoot of an owl somewhere in the vast dark, the expected nocturne. When true night descended, I burrowed into the tent, cocooned within my sleeping bag, surrendering to sleep's gentle current. It began with the shriek. Not human, I insisted inwardly, scrambling for rational explanation. Too piercing, too serrated. It sliced through the stillness with such violence that I jolted upright, consciousness lagging behind reflex. My heart hammered a frantic tattoo against my ribs, audible in the sudden silence. Frozen, I strained my ears against the dark. A fox, perhaps? A peculiar bird? Yet the sound remained solitary, a terrifying anomaly. A long interval passed, marked only by my shallow breaths and the desperate clench of my fingers on the sleeping bag's fabric. Eventually, a fragile logic asserted itself. Animals emit strange vocalizations. Surely. I eased back down, commanding tense muscles to yield. Then came the crunching. Footfalls, slow, weighted, deliberate, disturbing the leaf litter mere yards from my thin sanctuary. My breath hitched. Mind racing, I conjured mundane explanations. Deer, raccoon, an overly bold squirrel. It had to be. But the sound persisted, drawing nearer, beginning a slow, inexorable orbit around the tent. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Leaves protesting, twigs snapping under a pressure too significant, too methodical. My hand, betraying me with its tremor, fumbled for the flashlight. Twice, my thumb slipped before the switch clicked, projecting a pale cone of light. Unzipping the tent flap just enough, I thrust my arm out, the beam slashing wildly at the impenetrable dark between trunks. Shadows writhed, offered nothing concrete, but the footsteps ceased. The ensuing silence pressed in, heavier than the sound had been. "Hello?" My voice emerged a fractured whisper. I swallowed, tried again, forcing volume. "Hey, whoever you are, just stop it." The quaver in my tone shamed me. Only the sighing wind through the upper branches answered. "It's nothing," I repeated internally, a mantra against rising panic. An animal. Imagination, amplified by solitude and darkness, campfire stories, subconscious fears made manifest. I retracted my arm, zipped the tent tight, and sat clutching the flashlight, its plastic cool against my palm. A useless talisman against an unknown dread. When sound returned, it wasn't footsteps. It was running. A frantic, pounding cadence tearing through the undergrowth. Flashlight instantly reignited, I ripped the tent flap open. The beam snagged movement. A shape hurtling between the trees. Large, impossibly large. Upright, yet fundamentally not human. Its locomotion, its sheer velocity, utterly wrong. I stood paralyzed, staring into the space it had occupied, my mind refusing to assemble the fragmented image. Then, as swiftly as it appeared, it vanished. The woods fell silent once more, save for the ragged gasps tearing from my own lungs. Calm down. Panic was a luxury I couldn't afford. 2 paths diverged: remain huddled in the tent, praying for dawn, or make a desperate bid for escape. Staying felt like an invitation. Whatever I had glimpsed, whatever presence haunted these woods, it didn't feel inclined to simply pass by. Boots and jacket were donned with frantic haste, flashlight jammed into a pocket. My hands still shook as I retrieved my phone, keys, the small hunting knife I always carried. Meager defense, but preferable to none. The objective crystallized: reach the car, parked perhaps half a mile distant, just beyond the trailhead. Safety lay beyond the tree line. I clung to that belief. The trail, narrow and treacherous underfoot, was familiar territory. I kept the flashlight beam low, illuminating the immediate path, guarding against roots and stones. Every few strides, I paused, listening. The forest felt altered now, unnervingly silent, as if holding its collective breath. No crickets sang, no owls called, only emptiness. Then the shriek echoed again. Closer now, alarmingly close, seemingly originating from the direction of my vehicle. A knot tightened in my gut. My grip on the knife became bone white. I pushed onward, faster, abandoning stealth. Let noise betray me. Escape was paramount. The footsteps resumed, not behind, but flanking me, moving parallel within the dense trees. Unseen, yet undeniably present, keeping pace. A deliberate, stalking presence. I spun, sweeping the flashlight beam into the shadowed woods. For an instant, a flicker. Eye shine. 2 points of reflected light, low, animalistic. Then gone. The footsteps halted once more. "Leave me alone!" The shout tore from my throat, echoing mockingly back, diminished by the vastness. Silence answered. Turning back to the trail, I ran. Blindly, recklessly. Roots snagged, rocks threatened to send me sprawling. Twice I stumbled, recovering with jarring effort. Lungs burned, legs screamed with fatigue. But the car wasn't far. Through the trees, a faint metallic gleam promised sanctuary. Then I heard it, directly behind me, gaining. I didn't look back. Couldn't. To look back was to surrender. I ran, fueled by primal terror, every fiber demanding continued motion. The flashlight beam danced erratically, illuminating fleeting patches of bark and earth. I burst from the tree line onto the asphalt of the small parking lot like something pursued by demons, stumbling onto the open ground. There it sat, my car, a dark, solid shape against the lesser dark of the night sky. Keys, fumbled from my pocket, found the remote. A flash of lights, the click of unlocking doors. I covered the remaining distance in a desperate sprint, wrenched the driver's door open, and hurled myself inside. Slammed the door, locked it. Chest heaving, I sat for a beat, hands clamped onto the steering wheel, eyes fixed on the menacing tree line. Nothing stirred. The forest stood impassive, still. Then, a violent impact slammed into the car's side. A scream tore from me, involuntary, guttural. Again, the vehicle rocked violently, a force immense enough to threaten tipping it. Pressed against the passenger window, I saw its outline. Towering, immense, swathed in something dark, textured like coarse fur or gnarled bark. The details warred with comprehension, refusing to resolve into anything logical. Key jammed into the ignition, twisted. The engine roared. Foot slammed onto the accelerator. Tires shrieked protest as the car lunged forward, fishtailing out of the lot onto the narrow access road. Speed limits, potholes, irrelevant. Distance was the only imperative. The rearview mirror reflected only receding darkness. Whatever it was, it did not pursue, or perhaps it did, unseen. I didn't slow until my own driveway embraced the car, its engine ticking under the weak halo of the porch light. For a long time, I remained there, staring at my own reflection. Face bleached white, eyes wide with residual terror, hair plastered to my forehead with cold sweat. My hands still trembled uncontrollably. Eventually, numbly, I forced myself out into the house, securing every lock, every latch. Sleep offered no refuge that night. Each time my eyes closed, the images surged. The shape flitting through the trees, those reflected eyes, the unearthly shriek. I swore never to return. No more camping, no more woods, never again. Yet a chill uncertainty settled deep within me. This wasn't over. That presence, it wasn't merely animal, not simply passing through. It had watched, it had followed, and it remained somewhere out there in the encroaching dark. The woods, the deep woods, I avoid them now. Since that ordeal last month in the Shadow Creek timberland, the thought alone is enough. My friends dismiss it, call me skittish, but they slept through the worst. They didn't chart the awful trajectory of those cries the way I did, minute by agonizing minute. This retreat had been etched onto our calendars for months. Myself, Ronan, Finn, and Leo. Seattle's relentless grind had worn us thin, and Ronan spoke of a sanctuary, a clearing nestled 4 hours east, deep within the mountains. Far enough from any marked path to promise solitude, yet supposedly tethered enough to civilization to prevent us becoming lost souls. A comforting illusion, as it turned out. The ascent was unremarkable. Ronan's SUV swallowed the miles, laden with canvas shelters, sleeping rolls, and sufficient provisions, beer included, for 3 days' escape. Radio signals, fractured and dissolved as the peaks loomed higher, swallowed us whole, but indifference reigned. Finn punctuated the silence with his reliably dreadful jokes. Leo surrendered to slumber in the rear. I watched through the passenger glass as the pines thickened, their green deepening into shades of twilight even in the afternoon sun. We reached the trailhead near 3. The lot sat vacant but for a single decaying pickup, its paint blistered, barren Montana plates, a silent, rusty sentinel. Ronan guided us along the primary trail for perhaps 2 miles before veering onto an artery so faint I'd have missed it entirely without his indication. The underbrush clawed at our packs, a persistent, scratching resistance. Another mile wrestled from the wilderness, and then, abruptly, the trees relented. The clearing unfolded, larger than anticipated, 100 feet perhaps from edge to edge, encircled by towering, silent pines. Near its heart lay a great fallen log, bleached bone white by sun and seasons. The ground, mostly level, wore a carpet of short grasses and verdant moss patches. An idyllic stage for what was to come. Our tents rose in a loose constellation, mine oriented eastward, Ronan's adjacent to my right, Finn's next, and Leo's completing the imperfect circle. The process dragged, hampered by Finn's incessant need to capture moments for his online audience. By the time our canvas home stood ready, the sun bled low against the horizon, casting elongated, spectral shadows that stretched across the clearing like grasping fingers. Ronan coaxed flames to life while Leo and I gathered more fuel for the pyre. Finn, with his sophisticated camp stove, began boiling water for our dehydrated rations. A mountain chill descended swiftly, typical for September's embrace, compelling us into jackets, drawing us closer to the fire's nascent warmth. Beer hissed open. Soon, familiar rhythms returned. Traded stories, gentle mockery aimed at Finn's most recent romantic catastrophe. The first violation of the night came at precisely 11:42 p.m. I know because I'd just consulted my phone, a familiar pang of annoyance at the absent signal bars. Distant, yes, maybe a mile or more, yet it sliced through the fire's crackle and our low conversation with surgical clarity. Talk ceased instantly, suspended mid-word. What in God's name was that? Leo's voice was tight, his posture suddenly rigid on the log. Cougar, probably, Ronan offered, though conviction laced his tone thinly. They can make sounds like a woman screaming sometimes. I'd heard cougars call before. This bore no resemblance. Embedded within the shriek, like fossils in stone, were the shapes of words, unintelligible yet unmistakably human in their cadence. It came again, stretched longer this time, a high, keenan lament that undulated, suggesting profound distress, a plea lost in the vastness. Finn scrambled to his feet, nearly upsetting his beer. Should we investigate? Are you insane? The words escaped me, sharp. We have no idea what's making that sound. But someone could be injured, Finn countered, his face pale in the firelight. We can't just sit here. Ronan retrieved his powerful flashlight, its beam cutting a transient swathe across the tree line. It penetrated scarcely 20 feet before yielding to impenetrable blackness. Listen, Ronan commanded, his voice low but firm. No cell reception. We're 3 miles, minimum, from the vehicle. It's pitch dark and none of us knows this terrain well enough for a nighttime search. The smartest, safest move is to stay here, maintain the fire, and reassess at dawn. Call for help then, if necessary. Another cry erupted, closer now, perhaps half a mile distant. It was undeniably advancing. More of its texture became discernible, feminine, yet fundamentally wrong. The pitch oscillated unnaturally, plunging to impossible guttural depths before soaring to a shriek that resonated painfully in the skull. Instinctively, we drew tighter around the flames. Leo produced his hunting knife. We'd ribbed him about his Rambo aspirations, but the laughter felt distant now, foolish. Maybe we pack up, Finn whispered, the suggestion hanging fragile in the air. Go back to the SUV. Another scream, closer still. Words surfaced, fragmented but clear. Help me. Please. Someone. We're not moving, Ronan stated, his authority absolute. Stumbling through these woods blind is suicide. We'd be lost inside 5 minutes. We stay together. Keep this fire blazing. There was no dissent. We fed the fire relentlessly, piling logs until it roared, casting our silhouettes onto the tent walls, transforming them into grotesque, dancing giants. The beers lay forgotten. The screams persisted, their proximity waxing and waning, a terrifying auditory tide. Sometimes the clear plea for aid, other times raw, inhuman sounds of agony or fury. The source seemed maddeningly mobile, echoing from the west one moment, then erupting from the east the next, never settling. Around 1 a.m., it drew near enough for secondary sounds to register. The sharp crack of a breaking branch, the susurrus of disturbed leaves just beyond the firelight's reach. Yet, each time, frantic flashlight beams stabbed into the darkness, they illuminated only void, only trees standing impassive. Finn was the first to audibly fray. "This isn't right," he stammered, voice trembling. "This isn't natural. That's not human." "Quiet," Leo hissed, sharp and low. "Everyone, just be quiet and listen." We obeyed. The fire popped, spat embers. Far off, an owl hooted its lonely call. Then the scream returned, so terrifyingly close it felt as though it originated just beyond the clearing's edge, inches from the light. "Please, oh God, please help me." The words weren't merely heard, they pressed against my sternum, heavy, physical. A pressure built in my ears, culminating in a distinct pop, like ascending rapidly in altitude. Leo cried out, dropping his knife, clutching his temples. Ronan staggered backward, nearly tumbling into the inferno. The voice mutated, deepening, twisting into something distorted, resonant with malice. "I see you. I can smell your fear. Let me in." What does that mean, let me in? Finn's whisper was ragged. "We're outside. There's no in out here." I actively suppressed the implications. My body vibrated with a tremor that had nothing to do with the mountain chill. Every muscle coiled, primed for flight, though a primal certainty held that flight was futile. The sonic assault continued unabated through the night, circling, relentlessly circling our small haven of light. Sometimes the cries would recede, offering slivers of false hope, suggesting the entity had moved on. Then, abruptly, a shriek would detonate directly behind one of us, jolting us around, hearts hammering against ribs. The voice remained fluid, shape-shifting, the desperate woman, the guttural wrongness, and sometimes, impossibly, both simultaneously, layered into a sound that defied natural law. Sleep was unthinkable. Entering the tents, isolating ourselves, was beyond consideration. We remained by the fire, backs pressed together in a fragile knot of shared terror, eyes scanning the oppressive darkness. Ronan's GPS unit, usually reliable, flickered erratically, its screen depicting our location as a jittering point, leaping randomly across its small map despite our immobility. At 3:27 a.m., a sound utterly alien in that context shattered the tension. Finn's phone began to ring. We all flinched violently. He fumbled it out, hands shaking uncontrollably. "Impossible," he breathed. "There's zero service." The screen displayed unknown number. Before reason could intervene, Finn answered, activating the speakerphone. The scream poured from the small device, amplified, impossibly clear, more piercing than ever. Finn hurled the phone away as if it were searing his flesh. It struck a stone, shattering, yet the horrific screaming persisted from the fractured remnants for several more seconds before abruptly cutting out. Leo doubled over and vomited. I couldn't fault him. The bile rose hot in my own throat. The first hints of dawn began to dilute the blackness around 5:08 a.m. As the initial gray light filtered weakly through the dense canopy, the screams started to diminish, losing their intensity. The final utterance was different, a prolonged, frustrated howl that seemed to emanate from all directions simultaneously, shaking pine needles loose from the branches above, causing the embers of our dying fire to swirl like angry sprites. Then, silence. A profound quiet, broken only by the awakening forest, the chirping of birds, the sigh of wind through the pines. We waited until the sun had fully breached the horizon before dismantling our camp. Few words were exchanged. We moved with frantic efficiency, packing with trembling hands, driven by a singular imperative: escape. The trek back to the SUV felt exponentially longer than the approach, despite our near-running pace. Upon reaching the trailhead, we found the parking lot empty. The rusted pickup truck from Montana was gone. Ronan drove us back towards Seattle in a heavy, unbroken silence, each of us startling at every unexpected noise, compulsively checking our phones, which now functioned with mundane normalcy. Later, efforts were made to understand. Ronan unearthed obscure forum discussions mentioning strange acoustics in those woods, but nothing concrete, nothing that resonated with the focused horror we'd endured. Finn erased his photographs, unshared. Leo sold his hunting knife online. We seldom speak of that night. When circumstances bring the four of us together, talk conspicuously avoids camping, hiking, or any venture that involves deep woods. Yet sometimes, when my phone rings, displaying that stark, unknown number, I let the call die unanswered, just in case. I've taken to sleeping with a white noise generator now. It helps mute the nocturnal ambiguities of the city outside my window. But occasionally, drifting in that liminal space just before sleep claims me, I fancy I hear it. A faint, distant cry carried on the night air. And I wonder if the thing from Shadow Creek timberland remains, still tracing its patient circles, still whispering, still waiting for an invitation inside. The ocean exhaled beneath a low-slung moon. Its light, an argent ribbon unfurled across the breathing water. A night sculpted for phosphorescent swims, for shedding the world. Yet, treading the cool embrace, a visceral cold snaked through me. Something vast, possessed of undeniable power, had just slid against my calf. No fleeting brush of fish, this. The gentle cadence of the waves turned instantly menacing, a silken veil over unseen depths. Then, ripped from the night, a strangled gasp as Reese vanished beneath the surface, leaving not even a ripple to mark his passage. My name is Liam. What began as a valedictory celebration on this isolated strand, a final, sun-drenched hurrah with friends before the lumen architecture of adulthood claimed us, had curdled into nightmare. We were four souls fresh from the collegiate cocoon, myself, Reese, Clara, and Finn, toasting the last vestiges of untethered summer. 3 days this secluded coast had been our haven. Tonight, its intended apotheosis. The day itself had been flawless. a symphony of sun-bleached sand, the percussive rhythm of beach volleyball, the hiss of cold beers cracked open beside a bonfire painting the descending dusk. As shadows stretched and the lunar eye opened, it was Finn, I think, who voiced the impulse. "Come on," he'd urged, already shedding clothes down to his swim trunks, his silhouette stark against the firelight. A chance like this, full moon, water like silk, not another human for miles. The spell of the moment, potent and undeniable, had claimed us all. Clara and I wriggled into swimsuits. Reese, ever impulsive, simply cast off his shirt and plunged in, denim shorts darkening instantly. We'd forged outwards, chest deep in the Atlantic's cool grasp, laughter echoing, water flung like handfuls of scattered diamonds. It was then I felt it, that solid, animate pressure gliding past my leg. I went still, the laughter strangled in my throat. "Guys," I'd managed, a tremor in the word, but Reese's silent submersion swallowed my warning whole. Now, silence pulsed where his cry had been. We stared, suspended in the sudden void, the moonlit water suddenly alien. "Reese?" Clara's voice, fragile, threaded with disbelief. "Reese, if this is a joke." But the wrongness was palpable. Reese swam like an otter, sleek and strong. He wouldn't vanish so completely, so soundlessly. "Out," Finn stated, his usual easy confidence stripped bare, revealing raw fear beneath. "We need to get out, now." We turned shoreward, limbs churning, a panicked, disjointed retreat. A knot of ice tightened in my chest, threatening suffocation. I fought it back, focusing solely on the pull and slice of my arms through the resistant water. Halfway, perhaps less, Clara screamed. I twisted, water sluicing from my face, to see her dragged backward, arms windmilling against an invisible force. "It has my leg," she shrieked, her features contorted by pure terror. Finn and I surged towards her, the water thickening around us, fighting us like viscous tar. She slipped under the silvered surface scant moments before we reached the churning patch of water where she'd been. "No!" The cry tore from my lungs as I plunged beneath the waves. Salt seared my eyes. Murk pressed in. A fleeting glimpse, pale flesh, an effervescence of trapped air. Clara, perhaps 10 feet down, sinking with horrifying speed, and coiled around her ankle, something, not fish, not kelp, but a long, sinuous gray shape alien to any known marine taxonomy, barely discernible in the moon's watery diffusion. Lungs screaming, I breached, gasping. Finn surfaced beside me, eyes vast pools of dread. "You saw her?" he choked out. I could only nod, breath still ragged. We inhaled unison, deep, desperate drafts, and dove again. Emptiness greeted us, only the endless, swallowing dark. We broke the surface once more, disoriented, lungs aching. The shore, impossibly distant now, a mirage of safety. "We have to go," Finn's voice cracked. "We can't help them if we join them." His brutal logic pierced the fog of panic. He was right. Whatever shared this water with us held all the power. Survival lay only on the sand, with the hope of summoning aid. We swam, forcing exhausted muscles, every splash, every disturbance in the water triggering a jolt of adrenaline. I braced constantly for the inevitable grip, the cold pull into the abyss that had claimed Reese and Clara. Maybe 20 yards from the beach, no more. Finn uttered a strangled sound, a wet cough of terror. I turned. He thrashed, head barely above the surface, fighting an unseen opponent. "Liam!" His cry was a raw plea, hand outstretched. "Help me!" My arms felt like anchors, but I pushed towards him. Just as I drew near, his eyes widened, pupils dilating in ultimate fear. His mouth opened, but only a choked gurgle escaped as he was wrenched violently downwards. Silence again, profound and absolute, save for the frantic thunder of my own heart. I floated, treading water, breath coming in shallow, useless bursts. Alone, the entity in the water had methodically taken them all. I was the last. Reason screamed, "Swim, escape, reach the shore." But terror had rooted me to the spot, a paralysis of the soul. I waited, suspended in the moonlit water, for my turn. And then I saw it. A shadow gliding towards me, just beneath the surface. Immense, easily double the length of a man. Closer, details emerged from the shifting darkness. Not one thing, but a convergence, a knot of writhing, fluid appendages, tentacles or tendrils, moving with a terrifying, unified purpose. I wish I could recount a tale of defiance, of a final, brave struggle. The truth is less noble. Blind panic seized me. I flailed, churning the water uselessly, a desperate, primal attempt to flee the inescapable. It was the physics of nightmare. Effort yielded no distance. The mass was directly below now. I felt the water roil around my legs as the tendrils began their ascent, coiling around my ankles. They were cold, slicked with an algal slime that repulsed on contact, their strength absolute. One final, desperate gulp of moonlit air, and I was pulled under. The crushing quiet of the submerged world descended, punctuated only by the frantic drumming in my ears. Salt burned, but I forced my eyes open. I was face to face with it. Nothing conceived in wakened thought, nothing dreamt in fever could have prepared me. A core mass pulsed with soft, internal bioluminescence, orbited by innumerable questing limbs and eyes. Dozens, no, scores of eyes, varying in size, ancient and intelligent, all fixed upon me. As I stared into those utterly alien optics, my lungs pleading for release, the impossible occurred. A voice, not heard but felt, resonated within my skull. "Do not be afraid." The thought landed with the weight of revelation. "You are chosen." The pressure around my legs eased. Abruptly, I was propelled upwards. I broke the surface explosively, inhaling air as if for the first time, the taste of it exquisite, vital. Disbelief struck anew. I wasn't alone. Reese, Clara, Finn bobbed nearby, their faces mirroring my own stunned terror and bewilderment. "What? How?" Reese stammered, his gaze wild. "I was gone." Before coherent thought could form, the water around us began to luminesce. The entity, the being, rose partially from the sea. The moonlight now revealed it more clearly. It possessed an eerie, transcendent beauty, its skin shimmering with intricate patterns of light that seemed to shift and flow like living thought, conveying complex emotion. "You have been chosen," the silent chorus echoed in our minds. "Witnesses to the depths, messengers to the surface." "Witnesses?" Clara breathed, her voice barely audible above the gentle lap of waves. To what? In answer, the being's light pulsed, a profound resonance, and our minds were flooded. Not with words, but with pure understanding. Visions of colossal cities beneath the waves, architectures defying human comprehension, civilizations that had waxed and waned while humankind chipped flint, repositories of knowledge and sciences that dwarfed our own aspirations. We have observed your species across millennia. The presence communicated. The time approaches for contact. You shall be our emissaries. As swiftly as it had materialized, the being submerged, sinking back into the profound dark from which it came. Gentle, unseen currents began to nudge us shoreward. We stumbled onto the wet sand, minds reeling, saturated with impossible truths. The adrenaline ebbed, leaving us shivering violently in the cool night air, water streaming from our bodies. Did any of that actually happen? Finn asked, his voice trembling, uncertain. We looked from one soaked, shivering form to another, then out towards the placid ocean. The moon's reflection lay unbroken, serene, as if the night had held nothing more than quiet waves. But we knew. We carried the weight of revelation. We had glimpsed wonders and terrors that would irrevocably alter the human narrative. And now, a message resided within us, demanding to be delivered. Huddled together on the damp sand, grappling with the enormity of the encounter, a strange, hysterical laugh escaped me. We'd sought one last adventure before the predictable march into adulthood. We had found something infinitely more profound, more terrifying, more transformative. Our lives, charted for predictable shores, were now irrevocably altered, and out there, beneath the familiar waves, an ancient, powerful consciousness waited, waiting for us to speak, waiting for the surface world to finally comprehend the truth of the abyss. Our midnight swim hadn't been an ending, but a staggering, terrifying inception, the dawn of humanity's greatest discovery, and we, improbably, were its heralds. The instant my gaze fell upon them, I felt it, the pristine surface of our family idol cracking, revealing an abyss beneath. 5 figures, stark against the sun-bleached curve of the sand, their collective stare fixed upon us, a silent, unnerving weight that prickled my skin. I tried to anchor myself to the present, to the small hands patting damp sand beside me, but the dread coiled deep in my gut, a cold premonition. Those distant silhouettes, I sensed even then, were poised to shatter our sun-drenched seclusion into a desperate scramble for survival. It had commenced as a vision woven from months of anticipation. Ilara, my wife, and I orchestrating this escape. A solitary beach house, cupped by dunes and whispering waves, a refuge for just us and our 2 children, far from the clamor of routine. Those initial days unfolded like a dream. Languid awakenings, elaborate sand fortifications contested with joyous shouts, evenings painted in strokes of apricot and rose as the sun bled into the ocean, observed from the quiet sanctuary of our deck. Yet, on the 4th dawn, the harmony fractured. I was sculpting a miniature moat with Leo, my son, when they materialized at the beach's distant fringe. A compact knot of men, their posture unnaturally stiff, like figures carved from driftwood. Initially, a fleeting thought, the shore welcomed all. But the hours unraveled, and the sensation of being scrutinized intensified, clinging like the salt spray. Each time my eyes lifted from Maya's shell collection or Leo's tireless digging, they were there. Static, distant, yet their focus never wavered from our small familial orbit. "Darlin', do you notice those men?" I murmured to Alara later, the sun dipping low as we gathered towels and toys still warm from the day. Her eyes swept towards them, a slight furrow creasing her brow. "Yes, been there ages. Just sightseers, likely." I offered a nod, a strained attempt to absorb her nonchalance. But retracing our steps towards the weathered timber of the house, a disquieting awareness bloomed. They had shifted, mirroring our path from afar. That evening, over plates fragrant with grilled fish eaten on the darkening porch, I saw them again. Phantoms hovering at the property line, dissolving into the twilight. Alara caught my fixed stare, her gaze following mine into the gloom. "Dear God," she breathed, her voice thin. "Are those the same ones from the beach?" A grim affirmation was all I could manage. "Should we alert someone, the constabulary?" Worry threaded through her question. I paused. What precisely would we report? Men standing on public land? It sounded flimsy, paranoid, even to my own ears. "Let's just observe," I decided, the words feeling inadequate. "Perhaps they'll vanish with the tide." But the tide ebbed and flowed, and they remained. The next day, and the one following. Perennial watchers, silent sentinels of some unknown vigil, the children began to perceive it too. Leo asking about the shadow men, Maya shrinking closer to Alara. We strived for a facade of normalcy, picnicking defiantly, swimming bravely, yet the air grew thick with unspoken tension. Our penultimate day brought the rupture. We were sprawled on a blanket, remnants of lunch scattered around us, when I saw them moving towards us across the sand. Not lurking, but advancing, purposefully. My pulse hammered against my ribs. "Alara," I kept my voice low, level, urgent. "Take Leo and Maya back to the house, immediately." She must have detected the raw edge in my tone. No questions came. Gathering the children with swift, anxious movements, she herded them away, her backward glances fraught with fear. I rose, forcing a composure I didn't feel, as the 5 men closed the distance. They halted mere feet away, fanning out slightly, penning me in against the vast backdrop of the sea. "Is there something I can help you with, gentlemen?" The steadiness in my voice was a small victory. The central figure, taller, broader, a jagged scar mapping one cheek like a riverbed, became their mouthpiece. "We've observed you," he stated, his voice a low rasp of gravel. "So I've gathered," I countered, maintaining an even keel. "May I inquire as to the reason?" He bypassed the query. "You must depart. Now, collect your family and be gone." A hot surge of indignation sliced through the fear. "I beg your pardon. We possess every entitlement to be present. This house is leased for the week." He leaned fractionally closer, his eyes pinning mine. You fail to grasp the situation. This isn't a suggestion. Consider it a final advisory. If this shore still holds you by tomorrow's sunset, repercussions will follow. Without another word, they pivoted as one and retreated, leaving me rooted to the spot, thoughts churning like the surf. I sprinted back towards the house, heart thundering a frantic rhythm. Ilara met me at the threshold, her face a mask of strained pallor. What transpired? What was their demand? She pressed the moment I crossed the doorstep. I recounted the terse exchange, watching apprehension and bewilderment war across her features. We must contact the authorities, she insisted at once. I nodded, phone already in hand. But as my thumb hovered over the digits, a chilling possibility surfaced. Hold on. I lowered the device. What if they are the authorities, or something less official? Ilara's eyes widened. What are you implying? I'm uncertain, I confessed, but this feels wrong, deeply skewed. Why this intense desire for our absence? What transpires here that we're not meant to witness? The ensuing hours were consumed by fraught debate. A primal urge screamed to flee, to put miles of asphalt between my family and this tainted paradise. Yet, a contrary impulse, a persistent curiosity that had often led me into trouble, yearned to uncover the hidden gears grinding beneath the surface. As darkness fully claimed the sky, our resolve solidified. We would remain, but not passively. Every item was brought indoors, shutters latched, doors bolted. I retrieved the old wooden baseball bat, initially packed for impromptu beach games, now feeling heavy with grim potential. The children were tucked into bed with reassurances of an early departure, oblivious. Ilara and I commenced a vigil, trading shifts at the darkened windows, nerves jangling at every creak of the old house, every sigh of the wind. It was during my watch, near the 2 a.m. nadir of the night, that I saw them. Beams from torches slicing through the dense foliage bordering our sanctuary. My heart vaulted into my throat. Ilara, I whispered fiercely, shaking her awake. They've come. We moved with desperate efficiency, lifting the sleeping children from their beds. Leo and Maya, disoriented and bleary-eyed, sensed the ambient fear and remained blessedly silent. We're off on a secret quest, Ilara murmured, her cheerfulness brittle but brave. Absolute silence is key, understand? We descended the stairs stealthily, my grip white-knuckled on the bat. Through the window panes, the dancing lights drew closer, methodically tightening their cordon around the house. The rear exit, I breathed to Ilara. Make for the car. She nodded, clutching the children, her hands trembling slightly. I drew a steadying breath, then eased the back door open, millimeter by quiet millimeter. The cool night air kissed our skin as we slipped into the shadows. We had almost reached the silhouette of our vehicle when a harsh cry split the silence. There! They're there! Light beams swung violently, pinning us. The drumming of running feet on sandy soil. Go! I roared, shoving Ilara and the children towards the car door. Get inside. Drive. Ilara wrestled with the ignition, keys rattling frantically. I spun, bat held high, confronting the oncoming shapes. The first man reached me. I swung, the impact jarring up my arm, a sickening thud echoing faintly. He crumpled. More surged forward. I swung again and again, muscles screaming, fueled by raw adrenaline and the ferocious need to shield my family. Behind me, the engine coughed, then roared to life. "Reese!" Alara screamed my name. "Now!" I bolted, launching myself into the passenger seat as Alara slammed the accelerator. The tires spun, spitting sand, then found purchase. We surged down the track, away from the besieged house, away from the pursuing figures. In the rearview mirror, frantic torch beams bounced like malevolent fireflies, chasing us until the oppressive darkness finally swallowed them whole. We drove wrapped in a taut silence, punctuated only by the soft, frightened whimpers from the back seat. An hour passed, perhaps more, before Alara, assured we weren't pursued, veered into the desolate parking lot of an all-night roadside cafe. What precisely just occurred? She stammered, her voice frayed. I shook my head, the events still replaying in jarring fragments. I don't know, but I believe we narrowly evaded something truly terrible. We lingered there, huddled in the car's small metal shell, attempting to soothe the children and our own shredded nerves. Eventually, we navigated to the nearest town, locating its police station. The officers listened, their expressions ranging from patient to overtly skeptical. A report was filed. Assurances of an investigation were made, but their eyes held the familiar dismissal reserved for over-imaginative vacationers spooked by shadows. We never returned to the beach house. Our journey was a straight, weary line back home, the dream vacation curdled into a lingering trauma. For weeks, every unexpected noise made me jump. Every shadow seemed to hold a lurking figure. They never reappeared. Life gradually resumed its familiar cadence, yet something within me had irrevocably shifted. I had glimpsed the terrifying speed at which sanctuary could morph into a snare, the terrifying thinness of the membrane separating safety from peril. What those men sought, why our presence was so intolerable, remains an unanswered question etched into my memory. Were they traffickers, using the isolated coast for illicit ends? Corrupt local powers guarding some buried malfeasance? Or a threat more sinister, something beyond easy categorization? The answers elude me, perhaps forever. But one certainty remains. I will never again view a tranquil shoreline without suspicion, without remembering that even within paradise, menace can coil unseen, waiting just beyond the placid rhythm of the waves. A yearning for stillness, an escape from the city's clamor, led me to seek refuge for the weekend in a diminutive bed and breakfast. It stood, venerable and tall, a Victorian edifice whose timbered floors sang a creaking chorus with every step, possessing an arcane allure that, under the sun's gaze, masqueraded as quaintness. Ilara Vance, the proprietress, an elderly woman whose smile was a warm hearth, ushered me in. Kindness radiated from her, yet her eyes held a curious vacancy, mirroring landscapes far removed from the present moment. I dismissed it. Old houses often kept company with old souls dwelling partly in the past, and my sole ambition was tranquility, the quiet company of a book, a measure of peace. My chamber resided at the corridor's terminus on the second floor, its lone window gazing into a thick congregation of woods that jealously guarded the property's edges. Though modest in size, the window framed the ceaseless ballet of branches perfectly. The room resonated with me instantly. It breathed history, a bureau of dark, aged wood, a solitary armchair slumped in one corner, a grand four-poster bed draped in quilts that seemed spun from time itself. Silence settled comfortably here. Peace felt attainable. The inaugural night passed without incident. Lost in pages, I welcomed the profound quiet, the stark contrast to urban cacophony. Then, near the stroke of midnight, a sound began. Footsteps ghostly faint at first, the merest complaint of floorboards from the hallway. It sounded like pacing, a soft, rhythmic tread just beyond my door. Perhaps another guest, I reasoned, or maybe Alara Vance herself navigating the resonant structure. Old houses amplify whispers into shouts. I attempted to disregard it, but the cadence persisted. Unhurried, unwavering, never drawn nearer nor receding, simply traversing the same short path again and again. Rising, I eased the door open, peering into the dim corridor, utterly vacant. The instant my gaze swept the hall, the creaking ceased. I scanned left, then right. Emptiness greeted me. Secure in the door, I pushed down the tremor ascending my spine and returned to the embrace of the ancient bed. Night 2 saw the return of the phantom tread, identical in its measured rhythm. This time, it commenced sooner, moments after darkness had claimed the room. I lay rigid, listening, whispering rationalizations to myself. The house settling its old bones, the wind playing tricks. Yet, the sound felt imbued with intention, as if an unseen presence stood sentinel just outside, measuring the floorboards, waiting. Clutching the covers tighter, I squeezed my eyes shut, seeking oblivion in sleep. But then, a new element intruded, the doorknob. It rotated, a minute shift, yet audible enough, a faint metallic click. My pulse surged, a frantic drum against my ribs. I bolted upright, eyes riveted to the door, breath held captive in my chest, anticipating its swing inward, the revelation of an intruder. Nothing. The knob eased back to its original position, and the footsteps resumed, precisely where they had paused. My thoughts fractured, grasping for logic, finding none. A desperate urge to fling open the door, to challenge the unseen walker, warred with a paralyzing inertia. Motionless, I remained, captive to the relentless pacing and the frantic thudding within my own chest. Morning found me descending to the dining room, harboring a sliver of hope for encountering another soul, someone to corroborate the nocturnal disturbances. Only Alara Vance occupied the space. She offered the same ethereal smile, inquiring about the quality of my rest. The questions burned on my tongue. Are there other guests? Did you hear anything unusual? But voicing them felt absurd, the complaint of an adult unnerved by mere creaks. I manufactured a smile, assuring her my stay was pleasant. She inclined her head, her gaze drifting beyond me, fixing on some invisible point. "It is a very old house," she murmured, her voice soft as dust motes in a sunbeam. "Sometimes it remembers." The words hung strangely in the air. Eccentricity, I concluded, dismissing the unease. I'd known stranger folk. I dedicated the day to evasion, exploring the frost-kissed grounds, losing myself in a novel within the downstairs parlor, anything to banish the clinging strangeness. but nightfall inevitably summoned the familiar dread. The footsteps returned, louder now, heavier, imbued with a deliberate force, as if someone were stomping their frustration into the hallway floor outside my room. I lay taut, knuckles white on the quilt's edge, gaze locked on the door. Again, the doorknob began its slow, deliberate turn, a testing motion, probing the latch. Intolerable. Leaping from the bed, I lunged for the door, wrenching it open with a surge of desperate energy. Emptiness. The heavy tread vanished instantly, leaving a silence so profound it roared in my ears. I stepped into the corridor, scanning its shadowed length, illuminated sparsely by antique sconces. Nothing but the vacant passage stretching away. I lingered, heart hammering, hands trembling, uncertain of my next move. Retreat? Flee? Yet a peculiar magnetism held me rooted, an invisible tether to the house itself. Reluctantly, I closed the door, crawled back into the four-poster, and lay listening, waiting. The footsteps did not resume that night, but sleep remained elusive. Each nocturnal sigh of the old house, a settling beam, a gust of wind, jolted me back to high alert. Come morning, resolve hardened within me. I sought out Elara Vance, determined to press her. I found her in the kitchen, humming a tuneless melody while tending to breakfast preparations. As casually as I could muster, I inquired if anyone else occupied the house, if she herself had noted any disturbances in the night. She turned, those distant eyes settling on me, her expression an unreadable mask. "You are the sole guest," she stated, her voice barely more than a breath. "And I do not venture upstairs after dark." A glacial chill traced my spine, but I maintained composure. "Are you certain? Because I hear footsteps distinctly outside my room. It's quiet, unsettling." Her gaze sharpened, suddenly serious. "This house possesses great age. It holds memories. Sometimes," she paused, looking directly at me, "things linger." There was no room for doubt, no hint of jest. She believed it unequivocally. Quitting the kitchen, I felt profoundly adrift. The urge to abandon the weekend, to flee back to the city's predictable chaos, was potent. Yet something held me fast, a morbid curiosity intertwined with a primal fear. I felt compelled to understand, to witness the conclusion of this unsettling play. That night, I prepared myself, steeling my nerves for the inevitable performance. I lay rigid, every fiber of my being coiled, waiting. Midnight tolled, passed. Silence reigned. A cautious relaxation began to unspool within me. Perhaps it was over. Then a new sound whispered into existence. Susurration, soft and insidious, originating just beyond the door. My heart leaped. I strained to decipher the sound, to catch the words veiled within the whispers. Faint, almost subliminal, yet unmistakably forming my name. I sat bolt upright, staring at the impassive wood, my hands quivering. The whispering persisted, gentle yet insistent, a summons from the shadows. Fear warred with an overwhelming need to know. Slowly, I rose, crossed the room on silent feet, and pressed my ear to the cool wood. The whispering instantly ceased, swallowed by a heavy, expectant silence. My hand, trembling, reached for the knob. I turned it slowly, easing the door inward. The corridor lay empty, as always, but the very air felt altered, thick, dense, charged with an oppressive weight. Stepping out, pulse frantic, I scanned the dimness, half convinced a figure lurked just beyond sight. Only emptiness prevailed. Yet, as I took a hesitant step forward, that strange magnetism intensified, drawing me down the hallway. I moved as if in a trance, my own footfalls unnaturally loud in the stillness, questions swirling chaotically in my mind. Destination unknown, purpose unclear, yet I could not halt my progress. Near the corridor's end, almost swallowed by the gloom, a door materialized where I hadn't registered one before. It was ancient, its wood warped and split, bearing the look of long disuse. A profound sense of foreboding washed over me as my fingers closed around the cold, unfamiliar handle. Yet the compulsion was absolute. I turned the handle, pushed the door inward, and stepped across the threshold. Darkness greeted me, thick with the scent of stale air and profound cold. My flashlight beam sliced through the blackness, illuminating walls densely papered with old photographs, their subjects bleached and yellowed by time. Countless faces, men, women, children, stared forward, their eyes voids of captured darkness. Dominating the room's center stood an old rocking chair. As I drew nearer, the chill intensified, prickling my skin. A figure occupied the chair, its back towards me, utterly still. I could discern the shape of a head, the slope of shoulders, even the faint, rhythmic rise and fall that suggested breath. The urge to flee screamed within me, but my feet were leaden anchors. I remained transfixed, staring, heart battering my ribs, mind reeling. Slowly, glacially, the figure began to turn. A face swam into the flashlight's beam. Ilara Vance. But her eyes, they were transformed. Frigid, vacant pools reflected nothing, utterly devoid of the person I knew. She fixed her gaze upon me, her mouth stretching wide in a terrible, soundless scream. I recoiled, stumbling backward, terror finally severing the invisible cords that held me. Turning, I fled, pounding down the hallway, the echo of my own frantic escape reverberating through the sleeping house. I didn't cease running until I burst through the front door and into the biting night air, lungs burning, gasping for breath. I never looked back. That Tuesday, late in October's grasp, the house's heartbeat stuttered. I sat adrift in the amber lamplight of the drawing room, work emails blurring on the screen, when the familiar baritone chime of the regulator clock, a sound woven into the fabric of 15 years, faltered, the final bronze note choked in its throat. Silence rushed in, startlingly loud. My gaze lifted from the laptop to the tall sentinel of walnut and brass dominating the far wall. Its ornate hands were arrested at 11:58 p.m. Impossible. My phone declared it only 7:43. Rising from the worn velvet armchair, I crossed the Persian rug. The clock tower loomed, smelling faintly of polish and age. I eased open the curved glass door shielding its face. Cool metal kissed my fingertips as I nudged the filigreed hands forward to the present moment. The rhythmic thump, hiss, resumed the instant the door clicked shut. A comforting pulse restored. I returned to my emails. 20 minutes dissolved. Then, brazenly, the chimes pealed again. Midnight. A frown tightened my brow. Phone check, 8:03 p.m. Across the room, the clock hands pointed defiantly, perfectly at 12. A mechanical quirk, surely. I resolved to phone the horologist come morning. Again, I reset the time, peering more closely this time at the intricate dance of gears behind the dial. 3 generations this clock had watched over, passed from my grandfather to my father, and finally to me when Dad decamped to a sun-bleached condominium in Boca Raton. Its upkeep had been my quiet duty, serviced biannually by a specialist whose touch was near reverent. Never before had it faltered. Morning light revealed the clock immobile at midnight once more, but something else snagged my attention. Fine, silvery etches marring the enamel face, scars I swore hadn't existed yesterday. Not deep, yet undeniably present, they spiderwebbed faintly around the Roman numeral 2 My finger traced the slight indentations, a disquiet settling in my stomach. I rang the clocksmith downtown, Mr. Abernathy, the very man who'd last tended to its workings. Describing the midnight insistence and the newfound marks, I heard the puzzlement crinkle his elderly voice through the line. He agreed a visit was warranted, promising to arrive the next day. That night became a vigil. Laptop stationed on the low mahogany table, a potent brew of coffee steaming beside me, I settled in. Work could wait. My focus was the clock. Its hands swept onward, behaving with perfect decorum until 11:57 p.m. Then the tempo of its thump-hiss shifted, growing ponderous, heavy, like footfalls echoing on ancient floorboards. A chill unrelated to the autumn air prickled my skin. The room felt degrees colder. The minute hand didn't sweep towards midnight. It crawled, each minuscule shift an agony of suspense. At 11:59, the pendulum's arc turned chaotic. No longer a serene, predictable swing, it jerked in frantic, uneven arcs, sometimes wide, sometimes constricted. The sound warped too, shedding its familiar rhythm for a grinding, scraping dissonance that vibrated in my teeth. My knuckles whitened on the armchair's rests. I was transfixed. The second hand shuddered its way around the dial. As it finally touched 12, no chime sounded. Instead, a shriek tore through the room, the auditory equivalent of fingernails dragged down slate. The hands spun backward, a dizzying, counterclockwise blur, halting abruptly again at midnight. I sprang up, heart hammering against my ribs, and approached the clock. Fresh scratches overlaid the old, deeper now, gouged into the enamel. They formed clusters, almost glyphic, yet belonging to no script I recognized. My hand trembled as I reached for the glass. It was shockingly cold, radiating an unnatural chill. I snatched my fingers back, stepping away. The pendulum hung utterly still, yet a low, resonant hum emanated from within the clock's casing, a vibration that seemed to thrum in my very bones, making my fillings ache. The air directly before the clock shimmered, viscous like heat haze on asphalt. The rest of the night found me huddled on the sofa, watching the silent, frozen clock across the room. The humming persisted, a subaudible pressure until the first hint of dawn bled through the windows. Then silence, and the steady thump, hiss resumed as if nothing had ever disturbed it. Mr. Abernathy arrived precisely at 9, a compact man with thick spectacles magnifying keen eyes and hands gnarled by decades of meticulous craft. I recounted the night's strangeness while he bent close, examining the clock face with a jeweler's loupe. "These marks," he murmured, adjusting his glasses, "highly peculiar. The scoring suggests they were made from inside the clockwork." "Impossible," I breathed. "There's nothing within the mechanism capable of this." Mr. Abernathy opened the clock's main housing, his movements precise and economical. He probed the gleaming brass innards, his brow furrowed, concern deepening lines around his eyes. The escapement, the gears, the pinions, all immaculate, he finally stated, straightening up. In fact, unnervingly pristine. They exhibit zero wear. For an instrument of this vintage, that is, well, it's not possible. He retrieved his loupe, leaning back in. And these scratches. Look here. He pointed to a complex swirl near the dos feet. They aren't random. A pattern repeats. This exact configuration appears 4 times around the dial. I leaned closer. He was right. What had seemed chaotic scratches now resolved into a precise, almost geometric motif, repeated with uncanny accuracy. A cold knot formed in my gut. I hadn't noticed that repetition this morning. These marks were newer still. Mr. Abernathy continued his inspection, accessing parts of the mechanism I hadn't known existed. An hour passed. Finally, he sat back on his heels, mopping his brow with a folded handkerchief. 35 years I've mended timepieces, he said, his voice gravelly with bewilderment. Never have I encountered the like. Mechanically, she's flawless, too flawless. But these inscriptions, he shook his head slowly. I cannot account for them, and there is something else. He reached carefully into the intricate brass forest of gears and levers, extracting a small, brittle object. It was a piece of parchment, yellowed and creased into a tight square, wedged incongruously between 2 cogs. The paper was covered in the same alien script etched onto the clock face. This was tucked deep inside, Mr. Abernathy said, holding it out gingerly. It feels ancient, yet it cannot have been there long. It would have jammed the entire works. I accepted the paper, its texture dry and fragile. The symbols seemed to writhe subtly under my gaze, inducing a faint throbbing behind my temples. I quickly placed it on the coffee table. Mr. Abernathy packed his tools, his usual quiet confidence supplanted by a visible unease. I cannot repair what isn't broken, he stated flatly. But my advice, seek consultation elsewhere. Someone accustomed to phenomena outside the norm. His departure left me alone with the ticking clock and the cryptic parchment. The thump hiss seemed amplified now, insistent, filling the quiet house. I picked up the paper again, forcing myself to scrutinize the marks despite the returning headache. They resonated with a half-forgotten familiarity, like a dream image refusing to surface. The afternoon dissolved into fruitless online searches for arcane horology and anomalous scripts. Nothing matched. As dusk began to purple the windows, anxiety coiled tighter within me. The clock's pulse seemed to beat in every room. By 11:57 p.m., I was prepared. A digital camera stood sentinel on a tripod, lens aimed squarely at the clock face. My phone lay nearby, recording audio. I sat, watching through the camera's small screen as the minute hand crept towards its nightly appointment. The familiar strangeness commenced. The slowing rhythm, the invasive cold, the pendulum's drunken reel. But tonight, a new element emerged. As the second hand kissed 12, the scratches, the glyphs on the clock face, began to glow with a soft, ethereal blue light. The humming returned, deeper, and now possessed of a strange cadence, almost like fragmented syllables of speech. On the coffee table, the parchment vibrated in sympathetic resonance, its own markings mirroring the clock face's eerie luminescence. Abruptly, the camera winked out. My phone screen went dead. Darkness swallowed the room, absolute save for the pulsing blue script on the clock and the paper. The hum intensified, escalating into a physical pressure against my eardrums, my skin. The clock's glass door swung open soundlessly, propelled by no visible force. The pendulum remained inert, but the space behind it seemed impossibly deep, a pocket of darkness that defied the cabinet's shallow dimensions. The blue radiance cast grotesque, dancing shadows that disobeyed the laws of light. Raw instinct screamed, "Run!" But my limbs were leaden, held fast by the sonic pressure. The symbols on the parchment shifted, rearranging themselves into fluid patterns that defied focus. Then, as swiftly as it began, it ceased. Power surged back, lights flared, electronics blinked back to life. The clock resumed its placid thump hiss, the hands indicating the correct time. 12:01 a.m. The glow vanished from clock face and parchment, but the marks themselves had altered. They now formed a chillingly clear message in stark English. Time is not linear. The door is opening. Sleep was unthinkable. I spent the remaining hours delving into concepts previously confined to science fiction. Temporal anomalies, dimensional physics, the theoretical fabric of space-time. Nothing offered concrete answers, yet the fragmented theories resonated disturbingly with the night's events. This transcended mere malfunction. The next day, I began calling university physics departments. Most politely or curtly dismissed my account. But one, Dr. Eris Thorne, a professor renowned for her unconventional research into quantum entanglement, expressed cautious interest. She arrived that afternoon, carrying cases filled with sophisticated instrumentation. Dr. Thorne spent hours deploying sensors, taking readings. Her devices registered bizarre energy fluctuations localized around the clock, strongest near the glyphs. A persistent cold spot, 3 degrees Celsius below ambient temperature, clung to the clock, even bathed in afternoon sunlight. "The readings are anomalous," she murmured, eyes fixed on a monitor displaying complex waveforms. A consistent electromagnetic disturbance, but its signature matches no known energy source. And these markings? She traced one gently. They aren't conventional scratches. Material hasn't been abraded. It's been fundamentally altered at the molecular level. As evening drew in, Dr. Thorne calibrated more sensitive equipment, her focus intensifying on the approach to midnight. At 11:57, the now familiar sequence replayed. This time, her instruments captured the full spectrum: the sharp temperature drop, the EM flux, the peculiar low-frequency audio signature. As 12 struck, the blue glow erupted again, but her sensors detected something more profound: a distinct warping of space-time immediately surrounding the clock, like ripples on the surface of reality itself. "Incredible," she whispered, her academic composure yielding to sheer astonishment. "These energy patterns, they align with theoretical models of temporal distortion. It's as if the clock is generating a localized fold in time." The parchment on the table vibrated violently. New glyphs flared into existence on both surfaces, coalescing into a second message. The convergence approaches. 3 days remain. Dr. Thorne's instruments shrieked erratically, then simultaneously powered down. The room settled back into normalcy, the stark message hanging in the air. Promising to return with more robust equipment, she departed swiftly. That night, sleep offered no refuge. The clock's ticking seemed omnipresent, a relentless countdown echoing in my mind. The parchment lay on the table, its script seeming to squirm at the periphery of my vision. Morning found me calling my father. The clock's provenance suddenly felt vital. His voice, cheerful and distant from Florida, answered. "The old clock?" he echoed my query. "Grandfather's treasure. Picked it up at an estate auction, 47, I think. Never said much about its origins, though." A pause. He had his odd notions about it. Used to claim it helped him see things clearly, make big decisions. Said sometimes he saw glimpses of, well, possibilities, reflected in the glass. We mostly chalked it up to imagination. Did anything strange ever happen with it? Mechanically? Come to think of it, yes. Once, maybe a month before he passed, he called me, quite agitated. Said the clock was trying to warn him about something urgent. I drove over, checked on him. Clock seemed fine, running perfectly. He never brought it up again. I thanked him, hanging up, my thoughts racing faster than the clock's second hand. Dr. Thorne returned an hour later, armed with apparatus that looked borrowed from a particle accelerator lab. She spent the day immersed in data streams, consulting remotely with unseen colleagues. Overnight, the glyphs had proliferated, spread in intricate tendrils across the entire clock face. As midnight neared again, a tense anticipation filled the room. The sequence initiated, but the blue glow pulsed brighter, the hum resonating with a new urgency, a higher pitch. The darkness behind the pendulum seemed to deepen, to stretch. Another message materialized. 2 days until the paths align. The choice must be made. Dr. Thorne's advanced sensors captured unprecedented data. The spatial distortion intensified, forming what she breathlessly termed a nascent temporal vortex, centered on the pendulum's anchor point. The room temperature plummeted towards freezing. "These metrics are exceeding all theoretical limits," she reported, her voice tight with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. "The energy signatures are consistent with advanced models of controlled time dilation. It's functioning as a temporal conduit." The following day dissolved into a surreal haze of measurements, hypotheses, and escalating anomalies. The clock's ticking grew erratic, speeding and slowing unpredictably. Small objects placed near it vibrated faintly. Compass needles spun uselessly within 10 feet. That night's message was stark. Tomorrow at midnight the door opens. Step through or stay behind. Dr. Thorne's readings confirmed the temporal distortion was accelerating exponentially. The void behind the pendulum now seemed to possess a slow, rhythmic pulse, like something inhaling and exhaling darkness. The blue glyphs on clock and parchment throbbed faintly even in daylight. "Whatever process this is," Dr. Thorne stated grimly, "it culminates tomorrow. The energy curve predicts a singularity event precisely at midnight." The final day felt elastic, time stretching and compressing within the house itself. Watches refused to synchronize. The temperature fluctuated wildly between stifling heat and bone-chilling cold. The clock's hum was now a constant presence, a low-frequency thrum that rattled window panes. As midnight loomed, Dr. Thorne's instruments registered off-the-chart temporal shear. The blue glow from the glyphs illuminated the room entirely. The space behind the pendulum solidified into a swirling vortex of fractured light and impossible darkness. At 11:59, the final message burned itself into the air. The choice is yours. Through the door lies a different path, a chance to explore what time truly means. Stay, and the door closes forever. The pendulum ceased its motion. The vortex stabilized, resolving into a shimmering, elliptical doorway of pure, swirling energy. Peering into it, I glimpsed not a place, but potential. Cascading timelines, branching and merging realities, time flowing like water in currents I could barely perceive. Dr. Thorne's equipment whirred, capturing terabytes of impossible data, but her gaze was locked on the portal. "This is it," she breathed, "a verifiable gateway through time, the repercussions." I stood before the regulator clock, the ancient wood warm beneath my hesitant hand, the vortex exerting a tangible pull. Step through into the utterly unknown, or remain tethered to the life I understood. The hum had modulated into an intricate, seductive melody promising wonders beyond comprehension. Yet my thoughts anchored me. My work, this house, my father in Florida, his father before him, this clock that had measured their lives, now offering to unmake mine. Choices, consequences. The infinite regress of paths taken and untaken. Seconds evaporated. The vortex pulsed, an expectant threshold. At the precise stroke of midnight, my decision coalesced. I reached forward and firmly closed the clock's glass door. With a sound like distant, imploding thunder, the vortex collapsed inward, vanishing utterly. The blue glow winked out. The glyphs on the clock face and the parchment dissolved, leaving pristine enamel and blank paper, no trace remaining. The pendulum stirred, resuming its steady, reassuring thump, hiss, partitioning the mundane seconds once more. Dr. Thorne's instruments flatlined, showing only baseline readings. The anomaly was gone. She looked at me, a complex understanding dawning in her eyes. "Sometimes," she said softly, "the greatest discoveries simply reaffirm where we belong." The regulator clock stands in my drawing room, a paragon of temporal fidelity. No midnight halts, no spectral script, no doorways shimmering into existence. Dr. Thorne published a landmark paper on localized temporal phenomena, meticulously anonymized, sparking fervent debate among physicists unable to replicate or explain the event. She visits occasionally, her sensors finding only the predictable rhythms of a well-maintained antique. The parchment vanished that night, as completely as the scratches. But my detailed notes remain, locked away, proof, perhaps only to myself, that it wasn't merely a fever dream. The clock keeps perfect time. Walnut and brass, gears and springs, nothing more. Yet sometimes in the deep quiet of the night, watching the second hand sweep its familiar arc, I fancy I see a fleeting shimmer in the reflection on the glass, a residual flicker of impossible blue, or just a trick of the light, reminding me of choices and the vast, silent mystery ticking away behind the familiar face of time. The moment my boot soles met that high, desolate tableland, I understood nothing of the desolation I was truly entering. A furnace breath, arid and absolute, struck my face. The sun blazed directly overhead, a merciless eye in the bleached sky. Beneath my weight, the ground resisted, a mosaic of fissures spiderwebbing across baked earth. I scanned the horizon, miles upon miles of pulverized rock, ochre dust, and the skeletal remains of time-gnawed geology, all shimmering under the relentless light. Whispers had drawn me here. Murmurs of anomalous stone formations define the landscape's stark logic. Nothing more tangible beckoned. My pack felt meager against the emptiness, containing only water, nutrient paste, and a lens to capture the inexplicable. My vehicle, a distant metal speck, waited leagues behind where the sand finally surrendered to flat, unforgiven stone. Traversing this ochre wilderness, I passed solitary megaliths, thrusting skyward and jagged clusters huddled low against the earth. Hours bled away under the tyranny of the sun, scribbling observations, capturing angles of stone against sky, charting the slow celestial descent. My throat grew coarse as desiccated parchment. Beads of sweat traced hot paths down my temples, pooled at my collar. The air hung motionless, a held breath. Only the crunch-scrape of my boots on grit, the sigh of an almost non-existent breeze, and the frantic drumming of my own pulse within my ears disturbed the profound stillness. Progress was deliberate, each footfall measured against the treacherous, uneven surface. A single lapse invited a twisted joint, isolation amplified. Precisely when the ring of stones resolved from the heat haze, I cannot say. Perhaps my subconscious registered the geometry first, an order too stark for nature's casual artistry. From afar, merely an assembly of upright sentinels. I advanced, wary, my mouth gummy, necessitating a draw from my dwindling water. Closer still, the perfection asserted itself, a flawless circle. The stones, roughly uniform, reached my waist, each separated by a gap just wide enough for passage, demanding a sideways shuffle. 12 monoliths, I counted, precisely positioned upon the plateau's stage. Circling them, I found no trace of pigment or carving, only the rough texture of ages, surfaces scarred by minute cracks, the calligraphy of weather. Their arrangement felt deliberate, aligned by forgotten principles. An archaic observatory, perhaps? A ritual site abandoned to the wind? Shielding my eyes against the brutal afternoon glare, I tilted my head skyward. The light felt like a physical weight. A faint stinging on my forearms spoke of the sun's insistent brand. I resolved to remain. The formation's secret, if it held one, might reveal itself under the setting sun's scrutiny. My pack yielded a compact shelter, and my water supply could sustain me through the transition. Settling near the circle's perimeter, I consulted my timepiece. Time crawled across the immense landscape. The sun bled towards the western rim, painting the heavens in transient hues of bruised orange and royal purple. More photographs were taken, perspectives captured from low angles, my hand tracing the sandpaper roughness of the ancient stone. As the last sliver of sun plunged below the horizon, the temperature plummeted with startling swiftness. I unfurled a thin sleeping mat, erected the single-pole tent, a fragile assertion of presence. A small lantern cast a hesitant pool of light, kept deliberately low to preserve the spectacle of the star-dusted vault above. The air, suddenly cool, raised gooseflesh along my arms. The silence deepened, becoming absolute. No nocturnal insects chirred, no wind whispered through canyons. Only the sound of my own respiration, stark and intimate. Rising, I paced the circle's edge again, the beam of my torch sweeping the ground to avoid unseen pitfalls. Then I froze, convinced I'd glimpsed motion within the ring's heart. At first, a trick of the eye, surely. The crescent moon offered scant illumination, silvering the edges of the world. I crept closer, the torchlight trembling in my grip. There, embraced by the standing stones, coalesced shapes darker than the night itself. Figures wrought from shadow, devoid of discernible features, yet undeniably humanoid. They swayed in unison, a languid, synchronized choreography. A knot of ice tightened in my gut. My fingers clenched the torch's casing. I remained outside the perimeter, perhaps 10 yards distant, mouth agape, breath catching in my throat. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I directed the light towards them, but the beam passed through, illuminating the ground beyond as if they possessed no substance. Undeterred, they continued their silent, drifting ballet, raising phantom limbs, lowering them in fluid succession. My own legs felt leaden. A strange buzzing resonated behind my eyes. Swallowing against a throat gone dry, I wrestled with logic. Flee? Scrabble into the tent? Gather my belongings? Retreat into the vast darkness towards the distant car? Yet paralysis held me fast. I watched, mesmerized, until a chilling certainty dawned. They were oriented towards me. Faceless, eyeless, yet their collective attention felt like a physical pressure. My torch flickered erratically. I shook it. A faint electronic chime from my watch marked the encroaching lateness. Moonlight rendered the landscape pallid, spectral. The stone circle seemed to absorb the faint light, appearing blacker, while the shadow figures held the center stage. Abruptly, their dance ceased. They stood motionless, frozen mid-gesture. The air grew taut, constricting my chest. The pulse in my ears roared. Then, one lifted an arm, its movement unnervingly reminiscent of my own torch-bearing stance. I recoiled instinctively, a small step back. The figure mirrored my retreat, but strangely elongated, stretched. My arms began to tremble. I fought for composure, my breath escaping in ragged bursts. Another silhouette tilted its head. I found myself echoing the gesture involuntarily. A horrifying realization struck. It mimicked me, or perhaps compelled the mimicry. A dull ringing commenced in my ears. Each shift of my weight, each turn of my head was instantly replicated within the circle, yet subtly warped, their limbs seeming to pull and distend, testing the elasticity of shadow. My scalp prickled. The urge to run screamed through me, but an invisible force pinned my boots to the earth. My legs quaked. My throat felt scraped raw. The figures shifted constantly now, fluidly exploring the boundaries of their forms. With a supreme effort, I forced another backward step, stumbling over an unseen stone, nearly fallen. One shadow convulsed in sympathy, its torso twisting unnaturally. A faint sound reached me, a low hiss or the rasp of fingernails across rock. I extinguished the torch. In the dim moonlight, the shadows remained starkly visible, outlined by a faint internal luminescence, like shapes cut from a blacker void. Cold sweat slicked my neck. The fine hairs there stood erect. Then the compulsion struck, a visceral summons to enter the circle. It manifested as a physical tug deep within my abdomen, a strange insistence behind my navel. My rational mind shrieked denial, warned of unseen perils. My heart threatened to batter its way out of my chest, yet my feet yearned to move forward. My entire being felt drawn towards that central point, as if tethered by an invisible cord. I resisted, digging my heels into the unforgiving ground, clenching my fists until the knuckles burned. But with every passing second, the urge intensified, an unbearable itch beneath the skin. A glance towards my tent, a pathetic, flimsy refuge only yards away, offered no solace. Proximity was the danger. My gaze snapped back to the shadows. They swayed again, slowly, but the pattern had changed. Now they seemed expectant, waiting. A low wind stirred, the first real breeze since sunset, chilling the sweat on my face. I took an involuntary step forward. My left foot obeyed a will not my own. The shadows simultaneously raised their arms. A low hum materialized, less a sound than a vibration felt deep in my bones. I tried to regulate my breathing, short, shallow gasps tearing at my lungs. My pulse felt dangerously erratic. Another step. "Stop," my mind pleaded, but the body yielded. I tried to form words, a shout, but only a trembling whisper emerged, instantly swallowed by the vastness. "Stop it." I locked my right knee, throwing my weight back, but the ground itself felt tilted, pulling me onward. 10 feet separated me from the ring. The stones loomed larger now, their surfaces revealing faint etches, lines forming intricate patterns unnoticed in the daylight. The dusty air filled my nostrils, parching them further. My tongue felt thick and alien in my mouth. Another half step, stumbling, unsteady. The shadows seemed to pulse, growing subtly taller, as if drawing sustenance from my proximity. The humming intensified, vibrating through my sternum, rattling my ribs. The wind gusted, whipping grit into my eyes. I blinked fiercely, rubbing them, vision momentarily blurring. Through the watery film, the shapes flickered, yet their mimicry remained flawless. As I lifted a hand to wipe sweat from my brow, they raised theirs in that same grotesquely fluid motion. Drawing a shuddering breath, eyes stinging, I stood transfixed. The desire to break free warred with the inexorable pull. Part of me wanted only to collapse, surrender to the earth, but another step carried me forward, only a few feet now from the stone perimeter. An outstretched arm could have brushed against the nearest monolith. Adrenaline surged, tingling in my fingertips, churning my stomach. I strained backward, a futile muscular command against an unseen force. It was like being caught in a current, swept towards the circle's heart. The throb in my ears was deafening. My forehead dripped. Sweat traced cold paths down my cheeks. I wiped my face, my hand unsteady. Directly before me, the shadows parted slightly, creating an opening, an invitation into their domain. I stepped between two stones. The air instantly grew colder, stealing my breath. The ground beneath felt strangely yielding, softer. My knees threatened to buckle. My own shadow stretched before me on the ground, distorted by the moonlight, yet it lagged, its movement slightly out of sync with mine. Lifting my left hand resulted in a fractional delay before the shadow limb jerked into place. A faint grinding sound came from underfoot, like crushing tiny shells. The humming swelled, filling my skull, vibrating behind my eyes. Edging towards the center, the shadow figures closed in, encircling me in slow, deliberate arcs. The scent of dust mingled with a faint, acrid tang of sulfur. My eyes watered, my heart hammered against my ribs with painful intensity. Extending their amorphous limbs, the shadows formed a wide, unbroken ring around me. Each twitch of my finger, each shift of my stance, elicited an immediate, distorted echo from them. A tingling numbness spread through my fingertips. A dull ache settled deep in my calves. Thoughts scattered, incoherent. My entire awareness narrowed to the obsidian shapes surrounding me. No eyes, no mouths, just the suggestion of heads and limbs against the dim landscape. They maintained a distance of several feet but effectively blocked any egress. I turned my head, desperately scanning for a gap. They flowed with my movement, a unified, horrifying entity. My breath came in shallow, painful rasps. "Let me out," I croaked, the sound barely audible. No reply, but their featureless heads tilted in perfect synchrony. I raised both hands, palms outward, a gesture of appeasement. My muscles felt rigid, unresponsive. They mirrored the gesture, lifting their shadowy arms. My chest tightened. A faint, rattling vibration traveled up my spine. Slowly, deliberately, I attempted a backward step towards the circle's edge. They countered with a forward step, maintaining the cordon. My legs trembled violently, and I collapsed to my knees panting, the taste of bile and dust coating my tongue. I stayed there, head bowed, feeling the grit between my teeth, the humming momentarily softening. Lifting my gaze, I saw the shadows swaying gently, expectant. The frantic pulse hammered in my ears. My arms felt weighted with lead. With immense effort, I pushed myself upright again, knees unsteady. I shuffled sideways. The shadow ring shifted with me, each figure moving in lockstep. Turning, I scanned the sentinel stones. My torch, forgotten, dangled from my wrist. My thumb found the switch. A weak beam stabbed at the darkness, illuminating the figures. They flickered violently under the light. A wave of vertigo washed over me. The compulsion to remain rooted me fast. Coherent thought fragmented. A profound chill permeated my body. My shirt clung damply to my back. My mouth was so dry, swallowing felt impossible. Then, a sharp crack behind me, merely my boot striking a loose rock, yet it echoed like a gunshot in the unnatural silence. I spun, startled. The shadows twitched violently in response. The torch flickered again, threatening to die. A desperate gamble formed. Run. Though balance felt precarious, I lunged, aiming for the narrow space between two figures. They seemed to part just enough, flowing aside as I stumbled through the gap, exiting the ring. My hand scraped hard against one of the stones. A sharp, stinging pain flared. I hissed, but didn't stop, scrambling several yards away before daring to turn. The shadows remained within the circle, swaying once more, their strange dance resuming. They made no move to follow. My breath tore through my lungs in ragged, burning gasps. Blood welled from the gash on my hand. I smeared it absently on my trousers. Tears, born of terror and stinging dust, blurred my vision. One last look. The dark figures raised their arms high, cavorting under the pale moon. The humming faded into the vast silence. My body shook uncontrollably. Forcing myself to turn away, each step felt tentative, uncertain. I refused to look back again until I reached the small dome of my tent. When I finally risked a glance, the circle of stones stood stark and silent against the landscape, empty under the moonlight. I collapsed onto my sleeping mat, tremors still racking my frame. The air outside the circle felt thick, heavy, yet infinitely preferable to the chilling embrace within. Sleep was impossible that night. My eyes remained wide, scanning the plateau for any flicker of unnatural movement. I watched the moon trace its silent arc across the heavens. The wind rose and fell, a lonely sound in the immense dark. At the first hint of dawn, I rose, dismantled the tent with trembling hands, and surveyed the horizon one final time. The stones stood impassive in the growing light, betraying nothing of the night's horrors. No trace of the shadows remained. My legs felt weak, unreliable, as I began the long walk back. Not running, but a steady, relentless pace, punctuated by frequent, fearful glances over my shoulder. The rising sun felt hot against my back. My lips were cracked and sore. Every recollection of the shadow figures sent a jolt of ice through my veins. Reaching the car felt like arriving in another reality. I threw my pack onto the passenger seat, slammed the door shut, the sound unnaturally loud. My reflection in the rearview mirror was a stranger, pale, gaunt, eyes wide and twitching. The engine, turning over, was the most reassuring sound I'd ever heard. I drove, putting distance between myself and that accursed plateau, with no destination other than away. My mind still grappled with the impossible reality of what I had witnessed. No explanation offered itself, only the raw, visceral certainty of the experience, a memory lodged deep, still capable of making my stomach clench and my breath catch. Those stones, that circle, those dancing, mimicking shadows. I possess no name for what they were. I know only that I must never, ever return.